The bell rang at the courthouse door, and the room suddenly fell silent. All eyes turned in one direction. In front of him sat Judge William Harris, his eyes hard and merciless, as if they could detect every deception. Before him were two faces, one red with anger, the other smiling in a failed attempt to hide his fear. This was David Miller, slung over his chair, fists clenched, scars like wounds on his face, but these scars were not on his body, but on his trust. He was breathing heavily, as if each breath carried the weight of betrayal. Across from him sat Robert Thompson. He straightened his tie, drank water repeatedly, and tried to convince the world with a forced smile that he was innocent. But his eyes were trembling, as if he were afraid at every moment that his hidden secrets would spill out onto the courtroom floor. Even the audience chairs were uneasy. No one dared to cough. The court clerk rang the bell, and the voice rang out, "The proceedings are commenced." The moment was brief, but the courtroom shook like lightning. This case was not about money. This case was about a friendship that was broken. A trust that burned to ashes in the fire of greed. Today was to decide how long a lie could be hidden and how powerful the truth was. This is not a story of a typical lawsuit. This is a story of a friendship built on a dream, and that dream turned to ashes by greed. David Miller and Robert Thompson, two friends, two partners, who combined their hard work, sweat, and trust to take a small bakery to the heights of success. That bakery was the fulfillment of their dreams, a place where not only dough was needed but also hopes were shaped. But with time, when success began to take hold and profits began to increase, a poison also began to emerge in the shadow of this success. This poison was greed, and greed gradually began to erode the foundation of trust from within. The friendship that people once held up as an example, today, the same friendship is standing in the dock in this court. This is not just a business dispute, it is a mirror of human weakness. This story shows that when greed blinds the eyes, even years of trust crumble in an instant. At the beginning of the proceedings, as the lawyers presented their opening arguments, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Everyone was waiting to hear how Robert would respond to the serious accusations against him. When the moment came, Robert took a deep breath, put on an artificial confidence, and said the sentence that turned the tense atmosphere into a moment of surprise and laughter. He said that the money he had kept in secret accounts was actually not for any personal purpose, but for a new oven for the bakery. The courtroom fell silent for a moment, and then a few faces couldn't help but look serious. Judge William Harris adjusted his glasses and stared hard at Robert, as if wondering if a partner could really afford to secretly hide thousands of dollars and just buy an oven. David's face turned red with anger, but many in the audience couldn't hide their smiles. The pretext was so flimsy that the tension in the atmosphere was momentarily broken. But the truth was there. Such a large sum of money is not hidden for an oven. The story of David Miller and Robert Thompson goes back years. These two friends had been connected since school days. One was calm and hardworking, the other was eloquent and opportunistic. Their personalities were different, but their dreams were the same. Both always thought that one day they would do something that would not only make them successful but also make their name in the city. Time passed, education was completed, and the employment search began. But in this search, both faced the same reality. Working for someone else is not as fun as making something of their own. This is where the idea was born that changed their lives. The old recipes of David's father, who was a baking enthusiast, became an asset for him. Robert had a gift for words, the ability to convince people. The two decided that they would open a small bakery. The beginning was not easy. An old, rented shop-like room, old tools, and a small amount of savings. But the bigger the dream, the bigger the passion. David sweated day and night in the kitchen, kneading dough, preparing cakes, while Robert stood in front, welcoming customers with humor, understanding their tastes, and trying to spread the bakery's fame. The first few months were the hardest. Sometimes the cake would spoil, sometimes the customer would get angry and leave, and sometimes the kitchen supplies would not arrive on time. But the two did not give up. Their hard work began to pay off. Whether it was the taste or the service, People gradually started to embrace this bakery. These were the moments when their friendship grew stronger. Their trust in each other was so deep that they didn't even feel the need to sign a written agreement. They believed that friendship was the greatest guarantee. But little did they know that this same trust would become their biggest weakness in the days to come. Time passed, and the small bakery, which was built on nothing more than a dream and hard work, gradually began to make a name for itself in the city. Fragrant bread, soft cakes, and fresh pastries began to attract customers. The few who had stepped in cautiously at first now started coming back again and again. Seeing customers' smiles and empty plates instead of returning with full hands and compliments was like a new world for David and Robert. When the first year came to an end, both of them were shocked to see the accounts. A small investment yielded an unexpectedly good profit. There were tears of joy in David's eyes. He looked at the account book again and again, as if he couldn't believe that years of hard work had been rewarded so quickly. Robert's face also glowed with victory. He would proudly say to people while meeting them that this bakery is not just a shop but a living example of friendship and trust. Laughter and joy prevailed in those days. Sometimes David would try a new flavor of cake with his own hands, and sometimes Robert would give away free pastries to customers while making them laugh. The hard work of day and night had become a celebration, not a burden for them. They were beginning to understand that this friendship and this business would always continue in the same light. But fate plays a different game. Behind these joys, a shadow was quietly growing, a shadow that would shake the foundations of this bakery in the future. The bakery's successful days continued, profits increased, and the rush of customers now continued from morning to night. David felt that all this was the result of his hard work and Robert's intelligence. He was satisfied that the business was in safe hands, but behind the scenes, a different game was being played. A new desire began to arise in Robert's heart. The light of prosperity dazzled his eyes. While David was dreaming of spending the profits on improving and further developing the bakery, another path began to form in Robert's mind. The idea settled in his heart that if a part of the profits were secretly set aside, he would feel more powerful and independent in the future. At first, he hesitated. He spent many nights thinking, his heart telling him that it was a scam, but his mind supported the excuse that this money is also from the business, and I am also a partner. What am I doing wrong? In this conflict, one day he quietly went to the bank and opened a secret account, an account that was neither mentioned in the paper documents nor in David's knowledge. When a small portion of the profit was first transferred to this secret account, a strange satisfaction appeared on Robert's face. His heart was beating fast, but at the same time, there was a sense of peace, as if he had acquired a new weapon. At that moment, he felt that he was not only a partner in the business but also the master of his own destiny. Over time, this small part began to grow. At first, it was a few $100s, then it became thousands. Every month when David looked at the accounts, everything seemed clean and correct, because Robert had arranged the figures very cleverly. David's mistake was that he trusted his friend blindly. He never suspected that the very friend with whom he had been breathing for years was eroding his foundations inside. It was all happening like a secret scene in a movie, where everything seemed to be going well, but behind the scenes, poison was spreading rapidly. There were lines of smiling customers lining the bakery's illuminated board, but the truth was that a secret account was standing ready to swallow all this happiness. This was the moment where the story quietly took a new turn. The first stain had been applied to the paper of friendship, and in the coming days, this stain was going to become a betrayal that would end in a courtroom. For months, everything seemed to be going well. The bakery's accounts were in order, customers were growing, and so were profits. David was as content as ever because he was sure that Robert was handling everything with integrity. But one day, a small mistake put the first crack in that confidence. David was in the kitchen when he saw a receipt among the files on the counter. The amount on the receipt was much more than the bakery's original bill. At first, he thought that perhaps the paper was old or that there had been some small mistake in the accounting. But his heart was not at ease. He sat down and began to open the accounts in detail. One entry after another passed before his eyes, and then slowly a bitter truth began to emerge. Some amounts didn't fit in the accounts. Sometimes a large payment would appear for no reason, and sometimes profits would be understated. At first, he thought these were just common accounting errors, but as he delved deeper, a pattern began to emerge in these errors. As if someone was consciously hiding a specific part each time. His heart began to beat faster. Every unclear transaction on the paper seemed to scream that all was not well here. David's mind drifted to moments from the past, the nights when Robert had stayed late in the office, the excuses he had made for extra meetings. When they were all put together, a terrifying picture was forming. Now the confidence on David's face was replaced by doubt. A storm was brewing inside him. The blind trust given in the name of friendship was now being betrayed for the first time. He had no idea that this was just the beginning. The real game was still going on behind the scenes. After seeing the suspicious transactions, David decided to take a closer look at the bakery's daily records to investigate further. This was made possible directly through Emily Johnson, the bakery's cashier and longtime employee. Emily was a simple but sharp-eyed woman. She had been handling the daily accounts for years, so even the slightest change would not have escaped her notice. One evening, when David casually spoke to Emily about the daily deposits and withdrawals, there was a slight hesitation in her tone. Emily said that she often noticed that some large amounts of money did not appear in the accounts. Sometimes they were deposited directly into the bank, but they were not mentioned in the bakery's accounts. Emily also said that many times, Robert himself would go out with the money and say that he was depositing it in the bank, but would not bring back the receipt. Emily's words struck David like an arrow to the heart. Everything he had considered a mistake now began to look like a deliberate act. But there was also a note of caution in Emily's tone. She didn't accuse him outright, but simply hinted, as if she herself wasn't sure what risk she was taking with her words. For the first time, David felt that perhaps the truth was more bitter than he had imagined. If even an old maid could see these changes, how much deeper could the truth be? At that moment, Emily's gesture was like a bolt of lightning. He understood that the matter was not just a few incorrect entries, but something bigger and more secret was going on. Emily's careful words began to turn David's doubts into convictions. He could no longer rely on the trust he had built his life's work on. It was the moment when the idea first took hold in his heart that Robert was not alone in this game, but that perhaps everything was going according to plan. As David's doubts began to turn into convictions, he mustered up the courage one day and sat Robert down. His tone was gentle, his manner friendly, so that the conversation wouldn't turn into a fight. He calmly showed the figures and tried to explain that some of the profits weren't showing up in the accounts. But Robert's answer was such that the listeners could not maintain their seriousness. First, he laughed and said that he was saving this money for a new oven, so that the bakery could prepare 20 cakes at once. When David sternly asked why the secret account was needed, Robert immediately made up another excuse. He said that he was actually thinking that if the power ever went out for a long time, the money would come in handy to buy a generator. David's eyes were serious, but Robert's excuses became even more frivolous. Sometimes he would say that he was saving the money as a Christmas bonus for his employees. Sometimes he would say that one day he wanted to install a large glass window on the bakery wall so that customers could see the cakes being made from inside. There was so much absurdity in these excuses that if this had been a light-hearted party, everyone would have laughed. But at that moment, these excuses only made David more angry. He realized that Robert not only did not have a reasonable answer, but was deliberately trying to make the matter look ridiculous. This joke was actually the first glimpse of the big storm that was about to unfold. Robert's ridiculous excuses tore down the last pillars of trust in David's heart. Years of friendship, shared dreams, the days when they used to pick up dirt with both hands and knead dough, all flashed before his eyes. But now, with these memories, a bitter feeling had also been attached: betrayal. David remained silent for several days, thinking to himself that perhaps Robert would reconsider his behavior, that perhaps he would come and admit the truth and make everything right. But Robert kept making up new excuses every time, as if it were all a game. The moment when Emily had given the hint, the paper on which the suspicious transaction was recorded, and the moment when Robert tried to hide his actions while laughing, all of these were captured in David's mind. One night he sat alone in the bakery's office, looking at the ledger. The papers on the table seemed to be asking him, "Is this the friendship you have worked so hard for?" A pain welled up in his heart, but this pain also gave him the courage to make a decision. This was no longer just a matter of business, it was a question of honor and justice. David decided that if a friendship had turned into a betrayal, then the only way out was to knock on the door of justice. He met with his legal advisor the next morning and laid out all the evidence. The lawyer read it all carefully and nodded and said that the matter would have to be taken to court. Hearing this, David felt a heavy burden lift from his shoulders, as if years of suffering had found a way out. When David finally decided that he could no longer bear it, he took the first step on his journey to court, filing a police complaint. This was not an easy moment for him. A friend of many years, on whom he had placed the burden of both business and trust, was about to be listed as a criminal in the police report against him today. David arrived at the nearest police station in the morning. He had in his hands all the documents that had kept him awake at night. Account files, suspicious receipts, bank statements, and Emily's written testimony, all laid out on the table one by one. The police officer looked at the papers with serious eyes, bending over each page to consider them. David's tone was both sad and angry. He told how a friend had hidden behind the guise of friendship a business and laid a web of greed. The police officer listened to the whole thing, asked a few questions, and then began to file a report. Every sentence that was being written on the paper felt like a hammer to David's heart, but he knew that this was the only way that justice could be achieved. When the report was complete, the officer assured him that the matter would definitely reach the court. David walked out of the room, his steps heavy, but he had a determination in his heart. Now this war was not just for business, but for the truth. As soon as Robert received the police notice, his world changed in an instant. A few lines written on paper were nothing short of an apocalypse for him. The secret transactions he had hidden for years, the excuses he had made up in jest, now all were before him in the form of paper evidence. As soon as he read the note, Robert's face went pale. His hands began to tremble, and sweat began to flow from his forehead. The same man who had always jokingly avoided the subject now looked silent and helpless. This matter was no longer limited to friendship or business, but was about to be entangled in the clutches of the law. In a panic, Robert immediately picked up the phone and called his old lawyer, Henry Clark. Henry was a sharp-witted but cunning lawyer, always looking for some legal way to save his client. When he arrived at Robert's house, the scene made sense. The files, the notes, and Robert's distraught expression all made it clear that the matter was serious. Henry consoled Robert, but at the same time sternly explained that the game was no longer about fun and games, but about strict scrutiny in the courtroom. If there was even the slightest lapse, not only would the business be lost, but also honor could be lost. Robert bowed his head and nodded in agreement. This was the moment when he first swallowed his laughter and faced reality. Now the field was the courts, and the rules of the game were to be determined. After the police notice, the matter was now headed straight to the courthouse. This was the point where both sides began their preparations. David, who was still heartbroken but mentally strong, worked day and night with his lawyer to organize each piece of evidence. Every receipt, every bank statement, and every testimony became a weapon for him. The only thing that kept echoing in his heart was justice. And he decided to devote all his strength to justice. Robert, on the other hand, was in a completely different situation. He was sitting with his lawyer, Henry Clark, strategizing his defense. But his tactics were the same old ones: childish excuses, weak explanations, and averting his eyes from reality. Henry would repeatedly explain to him that there was no humor in court, only the echoes of evidence and arguments. But Robert would sometimes mention the new oven, sometimes say that he was saving money for future investments. This contradiction showed the preparations of both of them in different directions. David's files were rich and organized, with transparent facts recorded on every page. He wanted the court to see how he had been deceived. Robert's strategy was mostly based on wasting time and confusing the truth. He wanted the case to be prolonged so that the truth would be suppressed. One thing was certain: when the courtroom door opened, both of their preparations would be put to the test. On one side, the documents of truth; on the other, a wall of excuses. In whose favor would the verdict lean? This question was now becoming more pressing with each passing day. As the first day of court began, a strange tension filled the courtroom. In the deep silence, everyone knew that this case was not just a business dispute but a story of trust, friendship, and betrayal. Judge William took his seat and, after brief formal sentences, ordered the two lawyers to make opening statements. First, Sarah, David's lawyer, took the stage. Her persona was confident and her voice strong. She began her speech with the phrase, "This case is not just about lost money, but about broken trust." Then she detailed how David started a business relying on years of friendship, but Robert trampled that trust under the weight of greed. Sarah cited suspicious bank transactions, mentioned the testimony of the cashier Emily, and used the documents as a basis for future arguments. Her words echoed in the courtroom, and the faces of the audience were serious and sad. Then Mark, Robert's lawyer, rose from his chair. His tone was completely different. He spoke seriously but with wit. Mark said the case was based on mere misunderstandings. He argued that financial transactions in every business can sometimes seem complicated, but that doesn't mean fraud is taking place. Mark described Robert as a hard-working businessman who was saving funds for future investments. He said the plaintiff had emotions, but no evidence of actual fraud. A clear contradiction emerged in the courtroom. On one side were Sarah's solid, documented statements. On the other side were Mark's impressive but vague explanations. Judge William listened to both of them in silence. It was impossible to guess anything from their faces. But the audience already knew that this case was not going to end easily. The real battle was yet to come. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew more serious as Emily was called through the court door. An ordinary cashier, who had been hiding among the cash and receipts every day, stood today in a position where her words could be decisive. Judge William swore her in, and then Sarah led her forward to testify. Emily's voice was trembling a little, but her eyes were filled with determination. She said that for several months she had noticed that the bakery's daily earnings were being recorded in a slightly different way. Each day's cash was shown to be slightly understated, and the remaining amount seemed to be transferred to another account. At first, she thought it might be an administrative reason, but when this pattern repeated itself over and over again, her suspicions turned into convictions. She added that she had seen Robert himself sitting in the office for a couple of hours. He would skillfully transfer some money after looking at the papers. Emily said that when she carefully compared the receipts and bank records, there was a clear discrepancy. Several $1,000s were missing, and it was all going into another secret account. Hearing this, a wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge William urged everyone to be quiet and told Emily to continue. He made a further shocking revelation that on some days, Robert withdrew extra money, saying it would be used for business investments, but no receipts or proof were ever produced. Sarah asked questions with great skill, and each answer added more weight to Robert's case. Emily's testimony was not just the word of one employee, but was connected to all the evidence that brought David's allegations closer to the truth. When Mark attempted to cross-examine, he asked Emily if she had ever directly seen Robert use the money for his own personal use. Emily admitted that she had not seen any personal expenses, but also said that every penny in business goes through the accounts, and when money disappears from the accounts, it is not only a breach of trust, it is a crime. This sentence resonated in court. This testimony created a stir in the air. David's face looked determined, while Robert's expression became more nervous and defensive. Everyone realized that the direction of the case was changing rapidly. Emily's words not only strengthened David's position but also shook the atmosphere of the court. After Emily's testimony and the documents, the atmosphere in the courtroom was filled with seriousness. Everyone was thinking that Robert had no way out now. But when Mark gave his client a chance to explain, Robert's manner caused a small wave of laughter in the courtroom. Robert sat up a little in his chair and said that the money that had gone into a separate account in the bank was actually for the bakery's future dreams. He said that he wanted to buy a new oven so that the bread would be crispy and golden in no time. A faint laugh appeared on the lips of the audience, and Judge William also raised a slight eyebrow, despite his seriousness. He added that he had set aside some money to paint the bakery's walls pink because customers find pink more attractive. It was hard to suppress laughter in the courtroom at this bizarre argument. At one point, he said that Emily might have noticed a discrepancy in the calculations because she ate too much cake and the receipts were messed up. Hearing this sentence, even the judge had to be sternly silenced. All these counterarguments seemed more comical than real. His excuses were not only weak but actually strengthened the plaintiff's case. The atmosphere in the court was filled with a mixture of laughter and seriousness. Everyone knew that such excuses could not save a business partnership. After Emily's solid testimony and Robert's weak and humorous arguments, the atmosphere in the courtroom hovered between seriousness and laughter. Judge William, who was known for his sternness and principledness, fell into a moment of silence. All eyes were on him to see what he would say about the situation. After a few moments, Judge William closed the record file and took a deep breath. Then, in a very serious tone, he said that excuses like buying an oven or painting the walls pink in a business case were not only irrelevant but also a waste of time. The courtroom fell even more silent at his words. But then he softened a bit and smiled and said that if Robert really had opened a secret account just to buy an oven, then that oven must be the most valuable oven in the world, because thousands of dollars were hidden in it. At this sentence, waves of suppressed laughter ran through the courtroom. He added that if every business partner started saving surprises in this way, then accountants would have to be replaced by magicians. This sentence made the atmosphere light for a moment. But then Judge William reminded the courtroom in his deep voice that this case was not just about fun or laughter, but about trust and financial integrity. His smile disappeared, and his tone hardened again. This reaction shocked everyone. On the one hand, the seriousness of the court remained, and on the other hand, the humorous intervention of the judge made the moment memorable. The atmosphere in the courtroom was already tense. After Robert's excuses, Emily's testimony, and Judge William's serious but humorous intervention, all eyes were now focused on the moment everyone had been eagerly awaiting, the presentation of the main evidence. Sarah, the plaintiff's lawyer, stood up confidently. She slowly opened the thick file on the table. The silence of that moment was so profound that the ticking of the clock in the room could be heard. Beads of sweat began to shine on Robert's forehead. Mark, his lawyer, was shifting in his chair, a little uneasy. Sarah slowly placed some papers in front of Judge William. These were not ordinary receipts or ordinary papers, but rather secret bank slips recording large sums of money deposited into a secret account in Robert's name. As soon as these slips were revealed, the courtroom was in an uproar. A wave of whispers spread through the audience. Some people were trying to hide their surprise by putting their hands to their lips, and others were openly shaking their heads and regretting Robert's greed. Judge William looked at the papers carefully, then looked at Robert over the top of his glasses. The silence, which contained thousands of questions, began to fray Robert's nerves even more. Seizing the opportunity, Sarah continued her story. She explained that these slips were not just pieces of paper, but evidence of deceit and dishonesty that was enough to destroy a friendship and partnership. She indicated that these slips were not the result of an accidental mistake but part of a planned plan. Mark immediately tried to intervene, but every argument felt incomplete and weak. Because the slips contained not only numbers, but also dates, signatures, and clear bank seals. Robert's face had turned pale. He looked at the lawyer, at the judge, and at the file held by Sarah, who was sitting opposite him. The panic inside him was clear from his trembling hands and the expression on his face. The atmosphere in the courtroom at that moment was like a scene from a thriller. Everyone knew that the end was near. This revelation of the secret slips was not just evidence. but the tipping of the scales of justice. Judge William announced in a deep voice that these documents were central to the case and would be examined in more detail. His words made the courtroom even more serious. Thus, the truth behind all the pretenses, ridiculous explanations, and smiles that Robert had made was revealed. The bank slips dealt the decisive blow. A faint smile spread through the courtroom as the next witness was called. It was Tom Walker, the bakery's old delivery boy, known in the neighborhood for his forgetful appearance and sly remarks. As he entered the courtroom, the old hat in his hand and the loose clothes he wore momentarily lightened the solemn atmosphere. Judge William gave him the oath and motioned for him to sit down. As Tom sat down on the chair, he awkwardly adjusted his hat and said that he delivered dozens of boxes every day, but the hardest part of the bakery job was not that, but understanding Robert's excuses. The courtroom attendants laughed at this innocent phrase, and Robert's face grew even more stern. Tom said that often when he brought back the cash at the end of the day, Robert would secretly call him aside and tell him to put some money in a special envelope. Tom said casually that at first he thought it might be gifts for customers, but when the envelope started to get thicker every day, he became suspicious. The courtroom tried to suppress laughter, but many people couldn't help but smile. He added that once he accidentally handed the envelope to Emily, which made Robert blush and say that it was a secret bakery recipe. Tom admitted this in his simplicity, but today, standing in court, he admitted that the secret recipes were actually bundles of notes. Judge William himself couldn't help but smile and tapped his pen lightly on the table. Robert's lawyer, Mark, tried to undermine Tom's argument by asking tough questions, but Tom's innocence and truthfulness convinced everyone. After Tom Walker's humorous but factual testimony in the courtroom, Robert's excuses dissolved into thin air. All the arguments Robert had made up until now about buying an oven, painting the walls, or secret recipes had become meaningless arguments. Everyone knew he couldn't escape. Sarah immediately seized the moment and, with Judge Williams' permission, added confidential bank slips and the delivery boy's testimony, making it clear that these excuses were not only false but also proved a planned fraud. Every receipt, every money transfer, and every envelope was now definitive evidence against Robert. Robert's lawyer, Mark, tried to quickly make some arguments, but Judge Williams sternly stopped his intervention. Every argument Mark made failed to save Robert's pretenses. The excitement in the courtroom increased, and all eyes were on Robert, who sat helplessly in his chair. Robert gently said that he was only saving the money for the better future of the bakery, but Sarah quickly and clearly rejected him, saying that this approach was not appropriate for the future of the bakery, but illegal and a breach of trust. Judge William also looked at Robert with his serious eyes and said that trust is the most important thing in a business partnership, and the result of this trust is legal action. At that moment, complete silence fell in the court. Robert's humorous excuses could no longer convince anyone. Everyone knew that the court's decision would now be based on the truth of these excuses. Judge Williams said in a serious tone that although Robert's excuses had been exposed, another important piece of evidence had come to light during the trial. Sarah opened the file and presented a new document, which caught everyone's attention. It was evidence of David's secret bank account. Sarah explained that when the delivery boy and Emily's testimony came to light during the trial, further investigation also revealed that David had also transferred some of the bakery's income into a secret account. This was probably intended to protect his share before a partnership dispute, but the effect was that the two partners lost trust in each other. Judge William closed his eyes and said that this development made the case more complicated and interesting. Everyone in the court was surprised by this toast. Robert's excuses had already failed, and now David's secret account brought a new angle. Mark, Robert's lawyer, immediately stood up and tried to use the incident in Robert's favor, but Sarah immediately responded that this secret between the two was proof that a business can never be strong without transparency and honesty in a partnership. The courtroom fell silent. Judge William took a deep breath and said that this was not just a case of fraud or theft, but also of the complexities of human psychology and trust. Everyone wondered how friends and partners, who once did everything for each other, had become entangled in hidden money and suspicion. The discovery of David's secret account also taught him the lesson that any business partnership requires writing, agreement, and complete transparency. Not only Robert, but David also learned that secretive actions and selfishness destroy trust. Judge William looked at both and said that the court must now consider the true intentions and actions of both partners to balance the scales of justice. In this solemn silence, Judge William's reaction was the center of attention for everyone. He stared at the pages of the file for a few moments, then took off his glasses and took a deep breath. There was surprise in his eyes, disappointment, and perhaps a slight bitterness, as if he were thinking that the two of them had betrayed not the court but their own future. A smile appeared on his face for a moment, but it was sarcastic, as if he were saying that a person becomes blinded by his greed, and when the truth is revealed, that blindness becomes the greatest punishment for him. Judge William glanced around the courtroom. Every eye was fixed on him, and everyone was waiting to see what he would say next. Their first sentence was gentle but heavy. This matter was no longer limited to Robert's or David's lies, but the secret actions of both made it clear that the wall of trust had become hollow inside. They did not use loud voices or show anger, but adopted a calm seriousness that made the atmosphere even heavier. Judge William looked around the courtroom with seriousness in his eyes and a hint of bitterness on his lips. His voice had a power and control that immediately impressed every lawyer and audience. He began to bring both Robert and David into the circle of questions. The first question was from Robert. The judge asked if he was really saving the money for the benefit of the bakery. Why didn't he tell David? Robert was silent for a moment, then said in confusion that he just wanted to save it so that there would be no harm. But in this answer, he contradicted himself, because the documents in court proved that David had been kept completely unaware when he set up the account. The judge now turned his attention to David. He asked if he was also setting aside money, what the purpose of it was, and did he trusted Robert. David replied sheepishly that he was only doing it for business needs, but the documents and bank slips did not match his story. These intense questions and documentary contradictions created a sensation in the courtroom. Everyone felt that both had made mistakes in their respective positions, and these contradictions gave the judge a clear indication that discovering the truth would not be so easy. Judge William looked at both of them once again and said that the court would bring out the full truth in this matter and that lies or selfishness would not be tolerated under any circumstances. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on his words. The two partners, David and Robert, sat in their chairs, looking at the judge with anxious and slightly fearful eyes. Lawyers Sarah and Mark also stood silently, everyone's eyes reflecting hard work and struggle. Judge William placed his pen on the table, looked around the courtroom, and said that the court had carefully considered all the evidence, witness statements, and documentary evidence. Every word carried a weight of seriousness and judgment. This moment was such that the question echoed in every heart. Who is right? Who is lying? Whose selfishness tried to destroy this business? The people sitting in the courtroom looked at each other, and everyone's mind was spinning at the prospect of a verdict. Judge William took a deep breath and, in his resonant voice, began to pronounce the verdict. His words struck a chord in everyone's hearts. The judge made it clear that, based on the evidence, witness statements, and documentary evidence, it had been proven that both partners, David and Robert, had engaged in dishonest business dealings. They said that the two created secret bank accounts and hid profits for their business benefit, which is not only a legal crime but also morally unacceptable. The court also noted that the efforts and excuses of the two, such as Robert's new oven or David's saving capital, were in reality just lies and deception. Judge Williams emphasized that trust is the most valuable asset in a business partnership, and when trust is broken, the business and the relationship are destroyed. He also made it clear to lawyers, witnesses, and viewers that written agreements and transparency are essential for every partner. The impact of the decision was felt immediately. There was a mixture of shame, regret, and fear on David and Robert's faces. The only thing that remained in the silence of the court was the echo of the judge's voice. which emphasized the primacy of justice and the importance of honesty. This decision was not just a legal punishment, but also a lesson. Honesty and transparency should always come first in business. This moment was a painful reality for both partners, but for the audience, it was a lesson that there should be no place for deceit and selfishness. After delivering the verdict, Judge William also ordered the future of the bakery. The court made it clear that the business couldn't continue between the two partners, as the foundation of trust had completely broken down. Therefore, the court ordered the immediate dissolution of the bakery. As part of the dissolution process, the property, machinery, and all financial resources were reviewed. The court directed that the assets of the bakery be divided equally between the two partners, so that no one is unfairly favored. Every amount and everything should be distributed transparently, so that any kind of dispute can be avoided in the future. David and Robert showed complexity and bitter feelings on their faces, but the court reassured them that this distribution of justice was equal and fair for all. On this occasion, the court emphasized that if relations in a partnership deteriorate, the best solution is to end it and divide it transparently. This decision was not only legally correct, but also a moral lesson. It was a clear message to the bakery's employees, suppliers, and the community that transparency and honesty are essential in business, and if these principles are broken, the damage can be done to everyone. This friendship, once founded on dreams, now remained only in memories. Those days in the bakery, the aroma of joy and success, and the memories of shared labor were now emerging as a bitter reality. The greed and secrets hidden behind every success had irreparably damaged their relationship. Even employees and close friends were silent at this tragic end, because everyone knew that this was not just a business problem, but a broken friendship between two hearts. David and Robert raised their hands for a moment, perhaps in memory of the old friendship, but those hands also eventually came down. This ending between David and Robert reflects an emotional truth. It is important to value relationships in life and be honest at every step. Otherwise, along with success, relationships also end. The most important practical lesson from this story is that running a business on emotions or trust can be dangerous. The example of David and Robert tells us that even the smallest transaction should be managed safely. The rights and responsibilities of each partner should be clearly stated in written agreements. Contracts are not just formal documents. They are the most effective means of legal protection, transparency, and prevention of future disputes. Similarly, regular financial audits reveal the health of the business and the correct movement of money, and reduce the possibility of hidden losses or fraud. Transparency is essential at all levels. Stakeholders must be fully informed of transactions, reports, and decisions. This not only strengthens trust but also ensures the sustainability and growth of the business. The conclusion is that friendship or goodwill alone is insufficient for business success and longevity. Strong contracts, regular audits, and complete transparency are the fundamental pillars without which no partner can be safe, nor can the business remain stable. If you like this story and lesson, be sure to like and subscribe, and press the bell icon so you get every new story from us immediately.